Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Sonia McGowan with Covenant Pediatric Wellness Center, and we are here together for our monthly webinar. So today we're going to be talking about how mitochondrial dysfunction is such a big deal for complex kids. So I think one of the things that makes Covenant different is we are very strategic about the way we address mitochondrial issues. We test for it and we intervene in the right ways. And I think this is a big part of why we get such good results with kids. So I have been a chiropractor for 14 years now. Before that, I worked for the Judavine Center for Autism in St. Louis, and I worked with thousands of kids all over the state of Missouri. And when I discovered that autism wasn't just genetic or behavioral, I was hooked and had to get the credentials to be able to work with kids in a more biomedical way. So I am married to my husband, Shannon. He is a CPA. We live here in Jefferson City in a newly empty nest. So our daughter, Libby, is 21. She lives in Kansas City, and she's the music director for the School of Rock in Overland Park. And then we have Rowan, who is in his second year of college at Millikan University. He is a theater costume design major. And we're not totally empty in our nest. We have Ozzy, who is our sheepadoodle, who just turned a year old, who definitely keeps us busy. So the reason that Covenant exists is because Rowan had a lot of challenges when he was little. And I found it really frustrating to try to find the right kinds of help for him. He's completely neurotypical now, but we navigated a lot of scary and frustrating waters to get him where he is. So I sort of pledged that whenever I recovered him, that if I had the ability to make the process easier for other moms, I was going to do that. So hopefully that's what we've created at Covenant. So speaking of Covenant, we do a lot of things. We really focus on complex kids. So we use functional nutrition. We do neurodevelopmental exams. We do chiropractic, craniosacral therapy. And then we also have Covenant Pediatrics, which is we have Dr. Hannah Strong, who is a holistic pediatrician. She has experience and is gaining more every day with complex kids. So autism, PANS, PANDAS, but she also, her main focus is general pediatrics. So we have families who come from all over to see her because we are one of the few pediatricians in the area who does not require families to follow the CDC schedule for vaccinations. We believe that informed choice should be exactly that. And so if a parent chooses to do that, that's great. If they don't want to follow that schedule, they don't have to. We also do a lot of work around tethered oral tissue, oral restrictions, tongue ties, lip ties, cheek ties. And then we also work with moms who are expecting. So we do prenatal chiropractic. Once baby is here, we do newborn and pediatric chiropractic. We can hook families up with lactation consultation, feeding therapies, things like that. So we also see adults. So we have a chiropractor who sees adults. We have a massage therapist. We have also the same chiropractor does acupuncture as well. So we have something for everybody here. So I talk about complex kids a lot. And what do I mean by that? So it can mean something as obvious as a child with autism or a child with ADD, ADHD. It can be something like a kid with PANS or PANDAS, some sensory processing issues, maybe retained primitive reflexes, really any sort of behavior, language, or socialization issue. It can also mean oral restrictions. And maybe the child doesn't have a diagnosis, but they're just struggling. I call those square peg, round hole kids. So these are kids maybe who aren't great sleepers. Maybe they're not great poopers. Maybe they're super selective eaters, right? They're just struggling to meet milestones. They're struggling to just kind of do the normal things, eat, sleep, poop, right? They fall under my umbrella of complex kids as well. And those are the kids who all of these kids, we're really good at helping. All right, so at Covenant, we believe that there are no bad kids, and we believe that there are no purposeless behaviors. We know that the why matters, and we have to look for the root cause for behavior, language, and socialization challenges. And I'll tell you that I don't think I've ever had a patient who I've done functional nutrition testing with who was completely normal, like no findings whatsoever. I generally always find some sort of biochemical basis for whatever their challenging behaviors are. And so sometimes that is nutrient deficiencies, sometimes it's mitochondrial dysfunction, sometimes it's intestinal dysbiosis, sometimes it's low cholesterol, sometimes it's anemia, right? So we look for these things because how can we get them better if we don't know what the root cause is? And so that's what we've become really good at here, is getting to the root cause and the why. Okay, so let's talk about our topic. So mitochondrial dysfunction. So please remember, we're talking about dysfunction, not disease. They are totally different things. We are not talking about mitochondrial disease. So what are the mitochondria? So our cells are like a city, okay? And inside each cell, we have organelles, and each organelle has a different job. And so the mitochondria is one of the organelles inside the cell, and it is considered the powerhouse or the factory of the cell. So it creates energy. And so the more that cell needs energy, the more mitochondrial cells it has. So what does the mitochondria do? The primary function is to generate ATP. ATP is the energy currency of the body. And when I'm explaining this to parents, I usually liken it to gas for the car. So if you don't have any gas for your car, you're not going to get very far, right? The same with ATP. So if the body doesn't have enough energy in the form of ATP, we're not going to be able to manage higher level things like digestion, like immune function, like detoxification, etc. So primary function, generate ATP, make gas for the car. Another function of the mitochondria is what we call cellular respiration. So it's breaking down molecules like glucose in order to produce energy. So part of that cellular respiration includes glycolysis. It includes the Krebs cycle, which is the graphic that you see here, and then something we call oxidative phosphorylation. So the process at the end of the whole Krebs cycle, the whole cellular respiration process, is to simply make energy. So the other functions of the mitochondria, one of them is what we call apoptosis. This stands for, it means programmed cell death. So our cells do their jobs and then they need to go away, right? So programmed cell death is really important for tissue development, for regulation of immune response, and for the removal of things we don't need anymore. So damaged cells, harmful cells, all those things need to die on schedule and go away. Another thing that the mitochondria does is calcium regulation. So calcium is really important for a lot of things. It's important for numerous cellular processes: muscular contraction, gene expression, neurotransmitter release. All of that is governed by how calcium is regulated in the body. And that's part of what the mitochondria does, is help regulate calcium. Reactive oxygen species are another thing that the mitochondria manages. So sometimes electrons, so think back to chemistry in high school, right? Electrons will escape this process and they create what we call oxygen radicals. Sometimes you hear them called reactive oxygen species. And so too many of those reactive oxygen species will damage cells. And so the mitochondria are designed to neutralize those reactive oxygen species. And so one of the earliest areas of research around autism and sort of the whole biomedical basis of autism was something called oxidative stress. So there's a lot of research out there talking about oxidative stress, which is related to this. And there is a very clear correlation between high oxidative stress and kids with autism. And I see that too in the testing that I do. We see a very high oxidative stress in many of our kids, particularly kids with autism. Fatty acid metabolism is another function of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria break down those fatty acids, and that's what kicks off the Krebs cycle. And I'll tell you, kids who are complex, particularly kids with autism, but we're sort of seeing it spread out to other kids, they don't manage fats well. So generally what I see is very low levels of essential fatty acids, like omega-3s. I see low levels of cholesterol. I see low levels of vitamin D in almost every kid. And so we also, for example, when we do stool tests, very common to see that they're pooping away all their dietary fats instead of using them for energy. We also see that kids don't use fatty acids as energy very well, even when they have enough of them. So that's a really common theme that I see when I do testing with kids. So what are symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction? So if you were just to Google it, the first thing you're going to see is fatigue and weakness. In complex kids, that's not always the case. So hold that thought. But fatigue, weakness, often low muscle tone. And sometimes we see the opposite in that too, with certain kids. But it's really common to see digestive problems, particularly constipation and malabsorption. Remember, it takes a lot of cellular energy to digest your food. It takes a lot of cellular energy to poop. And so if you're a child who doesn't make enough gas for the car, pooping is going to be pretty tough. We see a lot of hormone and metabolic challenges. We see poor focus and attention. For some kids, we'll see growth and development issues. So maybe kids aren't growing at the right pace. Maybe they're not meeting their developmental milestones. We see immune system dysregulation because mitochondria and immune system are closely related. They interplay with each other. And so again, sometimes we see the opposite. We might see kids who have super busy habits, right? So they're all over the place all the time. They're the Energizer bunny. They never slow down. And sometimes the kids aren't squishy. They have very high tone. And so just because we see that sort of idiosyncratic presentation, it doesn't mean that they don't have mitochondrial dysfunction. So you can't be too rigid sort of in your assessment, because I've seen kids who literally never stop moving, who have the highest tone you can imagine. And when we do their labs, what we will find is that their mitochondrial function is highly dysregulated. So it's really best to test, not guess. So what causes dysfunction of the mitochondria? So lots of things. It can be nutrient deficiencies, right? Because you've got to have certain B vitamins and antioxidants and fatty acids to make that Krebs cycle go. And many of our kids have poor absorption of their nutrients. They have poor digestion in general. Sometimes they're selective eaters. Sometimes it's their diet. They just don't eat enough of all the right things. So nutrient deficiencies will definitely influence the mitochondria. Sometimes it's a pathogen. So a bacteria, a virus load, parasites, those are things that can get in the way of the cellular respiration inside the mitochondria, as can certain toxins. So think about, environmental chemicals, think about pesticides, herbicides, molds, metals, all those things are really, our kids are very susceptible to those sorts of toxins and pathogens. They're just sponges for it. Inflammation will also interfere with the function of the mitochondria, the reactive oxygen species that we talked about. And there are also some genetic mutations or single nucleotide polymorphisms that will interfere with the way the mitochondria work. So you might hear that called SNPs, genetic SNPs. And you've probably heard of things like MTHFR or COMT or VDR. Those are shorthand names for particular genetic polymorphisms or mutations. And there are specific ones that if a child is positive for those, it will definitely interrupt those processes. These are things that we test for here at Covenant. So if you're worried about MTHFR or any sort of other genetic polymorphism, we offer a cheek swab test for that. So super easy, not terribly expensive, and you get hundreds of pages of data on that. All right, so let's talk for a second about the cell danger response. So remember, the mitochondria provide energy production, but they also have a really important role in the defense of the cell itself. So when a cell is under threat, the mitochondria change from being the powerhouse energy maker, right, to being a battleship ready to fight off whatever that threat is. And so when the mitochondria pivot from powerhouse to battleship, it makes less ATP. And so what happens then is the body, that cell is sort of stuck in fight or flight, right? The body gets stuck there. And this is sort of the gateway to the complex issues because healing cannot occur when the cell is in that danger response and when the mitochondria are making less ATP. So this is a really fascinating topic. If you wanted to Google it, it's absolutely fascinating and it's very applicable to complex kids. So why do we care about mitochondrial dysfunction? Well, it has far-reaching effects for our kids for sure. A dysfunction in the way the mitochondria work will affect every organ system. It also affects the vagus nerve. So that's kind of a hot topic right now. People talk a lot about the vagus nerve. And we know that complex kids, as a general rule, are stuck in fight or flight. So their nervous systems don't easily pivot from fight or flight to rest and digest. So that's why it's super common to see kids who don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't poop, right? Because they're stuck in fight or flight. You can't learn complex things and you can't stop to use the bathroom when you're being chased by a bear, right? And so these kids just get hung up in that fight or flight situation. And so when this happens, we see kids who, again, don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't poop, they don't have a good balanced immune system. They don't have a good balanced nervous system. And so you just create this vicious cycle. So how do we test for mitochondrial dysfunction? First of all, we have to do a history and a physical exam. The history questionnaire that we have at Covenant is very comprehensive. Luckily, parents don't really complain about it because I think they understand that the more they can share with us, the better job that I can do to help them. So a very in-depth history and a comprehensive physical exam. If you have a doctor who does not do a physical exam with your child, find another doctor. I cannot tell you how many parents have said that I was the first provider who actually touched their kid. You cannot get all the information you need about a child if you don't do a physical exam. Now, there are times when a kid will absolutely not allow it. We do as much as we can, but the history and physical exam is very important. And then I have several testing options that are very helpful to uncover any sort of mitochondrial dysfunction. The most common one that I use is the metabolomics from Genova Labs, and I'm gonna walk you through that. The organic acids test. There's a test called the MitoSwab, and then we can also do genetic testing as well. So let's look at the metabolomics. So I've got sort of cuts of different parts of this test. So the metabolomics is a urine test. It's a first morning urine. I like to do the finger stick component too. It's just a little blood spot that gives us fatty acid levels as well. So this is part of the page 1 of this test. And it really, what it's doing is giving us an overview of the major pillars that this test looks at. So we have oxidative stress, we have mitochondrial dysfunction, omega imbalance, toxic exposure, and then methylation imbalance. And so this will give you kind of a rating. So you can tell that this little patient needs a lot of support, right? They need just a lot of nutrient support. They need a lot of mitochondrial support. And their behavior shows it, honestly. So, but again, remember, there are no purposeless behaviors. There are no bad kids. And this is the why behind this child's behavior and lack of development. So when we go farther into the metabolomics, this is the page that gives an overview of nutrient deficiencies. So you can see the little black diamond is exactly where that child's levels are. So you've got all these nutrients on one side and then the rating on the other side. And just like you would expect, Green is good, yellow and red is not so good. They need some support there. So you can see this child has pretty significant deficiencies. They also have a very significant need for some digestive support. So they need a digestive enzyme. They need a probiotic as well. So this is, even if I didn't look at anything else, when I see this page, I'm immediately thinking, I'm almost guaranteeing that this child needs support for their mitochondria. So this test gives us lots of information, but here are some specifics. So this test will tell us about what's happening with the intestinal health. So it will give us a rating on malabsorption markers. It will also tell us about bacterial and yeast presence in the intestine, because remember, yeast, bacteria, other pathogens interfere with mitochondrial function. This section tells us all about mitochondrial dysfunction. So, can they turn their fats into energy? He can't, not very well. Can they turn carbs into energy? Again, not great at this. And so when we look at his entire Krebs cycle here, he's got a lot of dysfunction. So he needs lots of support to get his body to make gas for the car. And remember, we talked too about how the mitochondria is involved with neurotransmitter regulation, detoxification, and you can see there's a lot of dysfunction with neurotransmitters for this child and poor detox pathways. So the metabolomics contains an organic acids test. Okay, it has an organic acids test inside of it, but it's expanded with some more data. We also can do the original organic acids test. So this is from Mosaic Diagnostics. Again, it's a first morning urine. And so this is a part of the report that tells us about the mitochondrial markers. So you can see that this child has some elevations in the Krebs cycle metabolites. We've got some sort of outliers here with the amino acid metabolites and the fatty acid oxidation metabolites as well. So I love the oat. I love the metabolomics more because I just feel like it gives more comprehensive information for about the same price. So once we know that a child has some challenges with their mitochondria, if I feel it's warranted, we will go even deeper so that we can be more dialed in or targeted on how we intervene on the mitochondrial function. And to do that, we use a test called the MitoSwab. So it's a fantastic test. It is a cheek swab, which makes it super easy for our kids to tolerate, getting the specimen. And so what this test does is it tells us, so remember a few slides back, I talked about cellular respiration. And so inside that whole respiration process, we have what are called respiratory complexes, and they are numbered 1 through 4. So when you see, for example, it says RC4 right here, that's respiratory complex 4. We have respiratory complex 1, 2, and then 2 plus 3. And so this test will go in and look at each of those respiratory complexes, and it will tell us basically the value and then where it stands in terms of reference range. And so what we want is for all of these respiratory complexes to be functioning sort of at an equal level. What we don't want is lots of up and down. We don't want everything to be low. And this really helps me dissect that whole process and be very specific about how we intervene. The other thing this test tells us is this number here, the citrate synthase. So this is a rating of, does the child have enough mitochondria in the cell? So sometimes we're dysfunctional because there just aren't enough mitochondria. And if that's the case, our intervention is going to be different than someone with plenty of mitochondria but poor function, like this child. Plenty of mitochondria, so their citrate synthase is 101%. But what you see is a lot of dysregulation here. So you can see how these numbers vary pretty wildly. So we go, 63, 46, 157, and then back to 44. And so knowing this data, super important, helps us be very dialed in on how we intervene. So again, it's a cheek swab. It takes a few weeks to get the report back, but the cost of the test is very reasonable. So I do this test with a fair amount of frequency because I feel like it helps us just be very specific about how we intervene. All right, so labs for complicating issues. So remember, we talked about some of the things that cause dysfunction are things like environmental chemicals, pesticides, metals, pathogens, toxins, etc. So we can dissect all that out. So there are tests that are available for things like environmental chemicals. So it will tell us, does the child have a high level of plastics? Do they have a high level of, organophosphates, whatever? There are tests that will tell us specifically about glyphosate levels, tests that will tell us about heavy metals. And in fact, so remember we talked about the metabolomics and how that's one of my favorite tests. There is an add-on that you can pay a few more dollars and they can test that existing urine for what we call toxic elements. So it will look at things like aluminum, mercury, bismuth, cadmium, all those kinds of things. And it'll give us a rating on what those levels are for that child. So that's an add-on that we can do for not very much more money. We can also test metals just by themselves. So different labs have metals, toxic element tests that we can do just as a standalone. We can look at pathogens in lots of different ways. So when we're looking at things like viruses and bacteria, we can do a blood test, just a standard blood draw. We can do things like the Neural Zoomer Plus, for example, is either a blood draw or a blood spot, and it will tell us about strep. It will tell us about several different viruses. It'll tell us about different antibodies and antigens that are present. So we have lots of ways to look at pathogens and also other toxins like mold. So, for example, the same lab that does the organic acids test has what we call the mycotox profile. And this will tell us about mold toxins. It's a urine test also. If you have more questions about mold and mycotoxins, a couple of months ago, I did a webinar on that. So you can go to my website, thewhymatters.net, and go to the webinar series and then scroll down and you'll find that, and you can access the replay on that. So it's really important when we find dysfunction that we gather all the data that we can to know what's influencing this. Because let's say, we know that on the metabolomics, it's telling us that we have pretty significant mitochondrial dysfunction. We're working on that. We're not making a lot of progress. Well, maybe it's because there are other things at play. Maybe they have, a huge amount of strep in their system. Maybe they have, high levels of mold or metals. And that is a roadblock for us for progress, right? So we need to know what's happening so that we can prioritize and check all the boxes. So what do we do about it? First, we have to figure out what's going on. We need the data. We need to know kind of everything that's going on with the child so that we can prioritize and do things in the right order. You can't do everything at once, right? And it's super important that you find a provider who understands the priorities and how to take lots of data and to distill it down into our priorities, what we're going to do first, second, and third. No matter what's going on with that child, I always support mitochondria first. We can do that with supplements. We can do it with diet. We can also really help mitochondrial function with things like ion cleanse foot baths and HBOD. Both of those things we offer here. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is well researched and known to increase the number of mitochondria in the system and to increase their function as well. We like to, of course, always address whatever pathogens, toxins, metals, etc., that we find in that child. It's very important to reduce toxic burden. So one of the things that you can do now, if you've got a complex kid, very important is to go natural for things like cleaning products, personal care products, because the more toxins that are in their environment, the fuller their bucket gets, right? And eventually that bucket's going to overflow. So if you can change to, toxin-free laundry soap, fabric softener, get rid of all the plugins in your house, right? Those things are toxic. Go to essential oils that are non-toxic. Think about what you mop your floors with, what you wash your dishes with, right? your lotion, your makeup, your everything. All of that creates a toxic burden for a child. And so you definitely, if you can pivot to things that are more natural, um, they're really not that much more expensive. And it saves you, I think, a lot in the long run. At our house, we use Melaleuca products. So our laundry soap, our fabric softeners, our stain spray, like our dishwasher, hand washing dishes soap, what we mop the floor with, all of it is toxin free. When Rowan, my son, was little, he was very sensitive to things like plug-ins and like downy fabric softener. It would break his skin out and his behavior would not be great. So it's really been an important thing for us to reduce that toxic burden. The other thing that we do pretty faithfully, we try not to use plastic in the kitchen. We definitely don't put like hot leftovers in a plastic Rubbermaid container. We would never we don't really use our microwave anyway, but if we happened to, we wouldn't do that in plastic. We wouldn't do it in styrofoam, right? So we stick with glass and other, safe forms of food storage and preparation. And then you need, this is not really something that you as a parent can manage on your own. Like I know so many like super smart, educated parents who know this stuff inside and out, but it's just not good to doctor your own kid, right? So you need to have help from someone who has qualifications and experience clinically to help you sort of sort all this out, prioritize, and help you know what is the next right thing to do. All right, so just a reminder to always remember that the why matters. We have to get to the root cause. We cannot, if you think back to that metabolomics test, there's no amount of medication that's going to help that child in the long run, right? They have nutrient deficiencies, they have mitochondrial dysfunction, they have gut dysbiosis, right? There's not a pill that's going to help that. There's not a shot that's going to help that. We have to look at exactly what's happening, figure out the why, and help make that better. So this is our contact information. Our practice is in Jefferson City. We have several practitioners here who are always taking new patients. So we have, of course, myself, Dr. Hannah Strong is our pediatrician. We have Doctors Kayla Nieper and Maddie Lehman. They are both our chiropractors. We're getting ready in January to bring on another chiropractor. Her name is Lacey Mays. And she will be doing adults and kids and complex kids as well. And we have Renee Davis, who is our lactation consultant. Jackie Stuber is our craniosacral therapist. We also have Liz Rackers, who is our occupational therapist. So if you have any questions at all, you can email me, Dr. Sonia at covenantwellness.net. You can find us on all the socials at Covenant Wellness, and you can check out our website to covenantwellness.net. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that this was helpful. Because you registered, you can have access to the replay at any time. And yeah, I hope it was helpful. If you have a child who has complex needs, we are definitely thrilled to help you. Just give us a call or give me an email and we will see what we can do to help you. So have a great weekend and a happy Christmas, and we will see you in 2025.